hörde Simply Focus mit Elfie Czerny and Dominic Gilda for Live Enjoy.
We've got a brand new exciting episode for you. Please welcome your hosts, Elfie Czerny and Dominic Godad.
This is episode number 55, and please welcome our great host, Professor Frank Thomas.
We are very excited to sit here with you today, Frank. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
I'm a big fan of yours since I met you for the first time at the EBTA conference in Vienna, where you did a workshop about compliments, and you spared me tons of work in doing this research because I was just about to find out more about the history of compliments, and well, I'm still thrilled by the workshop you gave and by the article you wrote about that, and look forward to talk with you about that today a little bit, and then also about practice-based evidence.
Frank Thomas is professor at the TCU Counseling Program and founding archivist of the SFBTA. Very important job. We will hopefully talk a little bit about that too. Before we come to that, what fascinates and has fascinated you with solution focus?
I think part of it is the people who are drawn to it. It's not an engineering type or an overly empathic type or a chronic feeling type or anything like that. It was so many different types of people are drawn to working in a solution-focused way. And its applicability in so many different contexts. Unlike some approaches or models that are based on metaphors or theories or research that are only for families or only for couples or only for psychotherapy, this is branched into all kinds of areas of education, organizational consultation, and many more that you know of better than I. So it's flexible, it's personable, and it's personal. You can make it your own if people allow you. So it takes a bit of confidence to say, this is my solution-focused approach, and to take it, to grab a hold of it and say, I'm going to make this mine and use the feedback from my clients to make sure that I'm doing it effectively.
And you were drawn to it in 85, so what drew you initially towards that approach?
Well, it was making a social mistake. Steve DeShazer walked up to me at a conference in New York City and handed me his card. And I thought he was so socially awkward. He turned his back on me and I tossed his card and hit him with it and walked away shaking my head. Who is this strange man that can't carry on a conversation in a party? And so I described him to my mentor, Brad Keeney. And he said, well, that was Steve DeShazer. And I just wrote one of the forewords along with John Weekland to his first book. So you need to go read it. So that was my introduction to solution focused. Of probably Steve remembered that, but brushed it off as well as this just happens that people don't get it the first time.
So you had to read the first book.
Yes, which is a very different book than most of the others because it's based on systems and ecosystemic therapy compared to some of the things that Steve was writing in his last 4 or 5 books.
You've been into solution focus for such a long time and still very passionate about it. So what makes you passionate about it today?
Seeing that it can evolve, that it's not fixed on any personality or any set theory that limits it or set context where only these people can do it. I've seen it applied in so many different areas that it is always living and growing. It's a very organic approach to me. And there are other models and approaches that I've used in the past. Of course, before solution focus was invented, I was doing psychotherapy for quite a few years. So you bring those in with you. They're part of your background, the train cars that come with you. But it's very flexible and it can fit with just about any student's imagination and the way that they see the world.
You mentioned evolution and you wrote this beautiful article about the evolution of compliments and giving compliments. So Elfie, what fascinated you with this article?
There are so many things. For sure, one of the things that fascinated me and that I love about this article is that it really shows the history of how we used compliments, or how Steve and Insu and the people at the BFTC used compliments at the beginning, and how we use compliments now. And I also love that you wrote about cultural adaptations and your experience in that, which made it very connectable for me as well. And then, of course, I feel that giving a compliment is a very, very powerful tool. And especially when we work with clients and we say we work on an eye level to really deliberately choose what we do, because it has an impact when I say someone, I like this and that about you. And it has an impact in everyday life, and it has an even bigger impact when I do it as a therapist. I love the idea of complimenting people by just asking them how they do it, by listening for their brilliance, for their their greatness, and by giving space to them to develop their thoughts, like you just give me. Thank you.
Well, obviously, Elfie's read it since I have. It's more familiar to her than it is to me, which often happens. We move on to a new project, and I'm just so glad that it has ripple effects in people's thinking and their practices. I was driven to write that article by one written by Chris Iveson back in 2005, where he said it's really a knowing position to give compliments. And I know that's misstating what he said, but it's close, and where people began to cut out compliments in some of their teaching and training. What I found was it has to be adapted to my comfort level as a therapist or supervisor or teacher. It also has to be adapted to the comfort level of the people that you're with. But it's an important tool to retain because some people will engage more in the process of reflecting through compliments than they will perhaps through answering of questions. And the two ways that generally people picked up on from the article were the relationship questions of what would your mother say you did very well in this instance, were people who know them well. I don't know them well, but people who know them well would be able to comment on their successes, their instances that they've noticed, their changes that they've made. And then also a self-complimenting process of staying very tentative and not offering something to them, but saying, how do you make sense out of this? How do you account for your ability to change? What difference has this made for you? What resources did you bring to this moment? So that people would be able to understand the process of making sense. And clients are going to make sense. It isn't as though it has to come first, but they are going to make sense out of change. And I would rather offer them an ability to make sense of that it's within their agency and their choice than to allow them to leave there thinking it happened by chance and they had nothing to do with it. And it was really that simple, listening to people from other cultures and how they were not able to compliment in a traditional Western way, that led me to start researching and writing on that topic. And I'm so glad that it was useful, especially to Elfie.
It really has ripple effects. So thank you very much for writing that. And you said that you are moving on. So what is your current fascination?
I think part of it is how does solution-focused connect with the rest of the psychotherapy world? There's this very strange idea that some people have in the solution-focused world that we are completely unique, that the patterns and the research based on other models doesn't necessarily apply to ours, that we are not just social constructionists, but our research is based on analysis of data and conversation, so we know exactly the kinds of questions to ask and those kinds of things. And I'm very thrilled that some other postmodern approaches are using practice-based evidence as a part of looking at what is effective in what they do. I mean, BFTC did research for a number of years with 6, 12, and 18-month follow-up, much like MRI did. What has continued to go well? Have new problems come up where you've not sought therapy? In other words, what is the carryover effect from counseling? Well, one of the things they found out was they had a 77% recorded and reported success rate, which meant they had a 23% no change rate. Well, what if we were to look at ways of increasing the percentage of people that got better or experienced positive change, felt like therapy was successful? Wouldn't that make solution-focused an even better approach? Not because of a technique, but because we engage the other in the process. And that's where my fascination has gone, and I've been doing research on that since the late 80s, of client experiences of being in counseling. And this is taking kind of a turn and coming back to that once again.
So what exactly is practice-based evidence?
Well, there's a variety of ways that it's used in medicine, in nursing, in other places, but it is attending to the culture within which you practice. While evidence-based practice is usually randomized controlled trials that people believe can generalize to all populations, practice-based evidence is saying, what's effective with my culture? What's effective with the people I see? And so you have people like Barry Duncan and Scott Miller who have done a lot of work in this area and continue to do this kind of work to say, what is effective in Bucharest? What's effective in Tokyo? What's effective in New Orleans? It's different in each location for each practitioner. So when people talk about on what do you base your idea of success in counseling, it has to be local. It has to be my experience with my clients talking about success. And it certainly can't be my perspective only if it's co-created, if it's conversational, if it's socially constructed. I have to get their experiences, feedback, and corrections, or it's not evidence-based at all. It's just based on my idea of what success is.
So what have you found so far? Or what else have you found so far?
What I found is that many people I talk to about this give lip service, but don't train people to elicit client feedback. So we talk about it as though it's something about scaling or about them saying this was successful and I'm finished. But it's also the process of how we do counseling, how we do solution focused. Can I tell a fairly lengthy story?
Yeah.
It might take a few minutes. My mother died about 4 or 5 years ago, and I have imagined this several times because of the taxi metaphor that the brief boys use. Where to? You get in the taxi, you say, where to, mate? And you take a taxi ride. Well, in the first taxi ride is the one that I rejected. And this was the one that normally would happen. I get out at the airport in Sioux Falls, and I'm visualizing this, my old hometown, and I get into a taxi, and the taxi driver says, where to? And I tell him, Grace Lutheran Church, 17th and Cleveland. Terrific. He turns on the radio to the station he likes. And it's a bit chilly out because it's March and spring weather. He rolls up the windows and turns on the heater. And he goes up Minnesota Avenue, turns left on 11th Street, picks up 10th Street, goes by the statue of David, by Michelangelo, nude and everything, all the way up to Cleveland Avenue, turns right, and drives right up to the church. It is the fastest route. That's the route I rejected because I wanted to participate in the ride. I'm going to my mother's funeral. I want to have a say in preparing myself before I get out and face people and face the service, etc. So I want to be in a mindset. So I get into the cab, and he says, where to? And I say, Grace Lutheran, 17th and Cleveland. He starts to turn on his radio, and I said, I'd prefer you leave the radio off. I'd like to ride in the silence. But great. The next thing is, he stops and asks me, would you like the heater on, or would you like the windows down? I said, I really would like the windows down. This is spring. We don't have spring in Texas this early. It's already summer. So we're riding along, and he goes up 10th Street after turning on Minnesota by the statue of David and gets up to Cleveland, and he's going to turn right because it's the fastest way. And I said, I'd like you to go straight. Let's go up to my old home street, Stephan, and then turn right. And we drive slowly by the old home. I can stop and think of all the memories of being in that house for 50 years. And then he pulls up to Grace Lutheran and drops me off. Now, in the first scenario, it was faster. In the second scenario, I had a say in the journey, and it was just as fast. But it was my journey, and I had a say in it. It may have been small to someone else, but it was significant that he asked my input on the route and rolling the windows down. And that's what John Norcross and many people look at when it comes to what makes it effective. If you don't ask clients, you're missing a valuable part of what makes it effective.
Wow, what a beautiful story. And how do you ask clients? Or what do you ask them?
There's wonderful ways of asking. There's several articles that have been out since the 80s on how to elicit client feedback on how it's going. But John Norcross, one of the preeminent researchers within the field of psychotherapy, has said there are basically 3 questions. These are how are you questions. How are you? How are we? And how is this? And whether you use PCOMS or FIT or any of the formal ways of seeking feedback, he says if you don't ask these kinds of questions, 80% of your clients are annoyed with you. And they call those ruptures, where they don't return or they have less cooperation because you're not attending to their experience. So in every session of some way of looking at what is your experience of me and us? What is your experience of what we're doing here? Is this what you would like to do and how you'd like to do it? And also just how are you doing in this process? And I found clients are wonderfully open of saying we went too fast. You missed something important at the beginning that I told you. You took a right turn when I really wanted to talk about where we were going next. And they're wonderfully cooperative when they say, I have a say in this. And that's the Norcross questions are the simplest. The PCOMS and FIT and other ways of getting the session rating scales and others, the things that people know about, are wonderful as well. And they work with postmodern approaches. The Houston Galveston Institute and many of their programs down there with collaborative language systems or collaborative therapy do this and formalize it using iPads. So it's all digitized and getting client feedback and collecting data, when that is probably the most postmodern approach that I know of.
So you really navigate together through a session.
Exactly. If we say that the client is the expert on his or her or their experience, why are we not asking, what's your experience of this? Isn't that the most important experience to know about rather than mine?
For me, there seems to be many different ways, and one way is to just ask my questions in a formulaic way and not letting the client be part of that journey, just letting the client answer. And the other extreme on the other side is just only asking the client and, for example, ask the client, well, what question should I ask you as a first question, and what question should I ask you as a second question, and what would be a good question now? So what is the mix mix of being the expert in the journey and being the taxi driver and asking the client.
There are some other things that John Norcross has written about, and that has to do with how do we start with clients to find out how much of a say they would like in the work. And we could go as far as Plowman's work with asking the client to tell the first question, etc. But I think it's more of asking, are there some things I should absolutely not do with you? What are your fears? What are successes that you've had in the past? To locate some of their experience about previous counseling is some of what he talks about. And the other is to say, are there things that we must include? And that may have something to do with asking them, I am a male, am I the right person for you? I am Anglo, I'm white, am I the right person for you? To start off on the right foot of collaborating, saying you have other choices, it doesn't have to be me. And there's evidence that religiosity, sometimes sexual orientation, sometimes gender, are very important to clients, and they tend to fall out if they're not asked, can we work together, even though you're female and I'm male? There's quite a bit of research about that. Plus, the research having to do with, it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, how we overestimate how well we're doing as counselors. And it fits in most professions, and you probably know a bit about this.
No, we're always doing great.
Thanks for the comic relief. That's good. There's some wonderful research that I came across of asking clients how they did and asking therapists how they did. And there were 40 instances out of, I think, 500 cases where the clients were saying, I got worse, but therapists only identified 4 of them. Now, this is not in solution focused, but we can't think that solution focused is that different from other approaches. So if we're not asking, how are you doing? And a large percentage of them are deteriorating and getting worse, we've actually done harm. And that's one of my goals, is to diminish the amount of harm that's done.
So what do you recommend your students to do with that? And they are trained in solution focus. So how do you bring this into a solution focused conversation? And when and where do you bring it? I mean, you gave us some clues, but I would like to hear a little bit more about that.
That's a really excellent question, because it's a socialization process for me. When I teach our Intro to Counseling course, where we introduce solution focused, it's a helping relationships class. And in there, and at least their 3rd and 4th videos, they are asking feedback questions of their role play partners, because role play can feel very real. So they're not practicing with actual clients, but they're asking, what went well? What did I do well? What did you experience as helpful? When did you feel hope? And some generic questions for them to begin to ask their clients on video so that I can see the responses. Part of it is the response of the counselors. It's often embarrassing. It's like saying, how was that for you? Was that good for you too? And they take it that way rather than, I want to know your experience. I can't read your mind, and if I don't ask, I may not know. So from the very beginning in my training, everyone asks those questions. We're going to stop and do research now. What was this like? The wonderful thing about research like this is Jerry Gale did his dissertation on Bill O'Hanlon's work, conversational analysis. And Dr. Gale found that many of the people he asked about their experiences in therapy said the research was more beneficial than the therapy. Asking about the therapy was wonderfully helpful to them. So we need to see this as one more step of offering services to people that are very solution focused, such as what went well. If they get used to it telling us the things that are going well, when they run up against something that doesn't go well, they're more willing to tell us, and we need to know.
So it's really inviting your students from the very beginning to stay curious about their practice and about the effectiveness of their practice.
Exactly. And it's wonderful as a concept. The difficulty is if you've never done it, then it's difficult to initiate it because it's a bit threatening. But we know from the research that, generally speaking, we are not very good judges of how well our clients are doing. And I still supervise people around the world. They're required by law or they've sought me out. And every week, someone is holding up an SRS chart showing me, here's the changes that have happened in these sessions. And these are very seasoned, skilled, solution-focused people. But they've learned the value of asking clients, what's your experience now? What was it last week? How is it different? And it's remarkable the cooperation that you get from people and the new information that you get.
So how would you invite really seasoned practitioners, and be it therapists, be it coaches, people who develop their solution-focused style already, to bring practice-based evidence into their work?
I go back to Steve. Don't think, observe. It's a different form of observing. You're going to get a different data set, if you want to think of it, a different viewpoint by asking. And once you take the risk and begin to say, I can learn from this. This is for the good of my clients. I'm going to learn from this. That's the first thing I would say, is go back to our basics, and that is we learn by observing. And we don't observe that unless we ask.
What else?
Another thing that I think people can do is to get into study groups once again. I started Aikido at age 44, 45. It's never too late to start something new. And this is like getting a beginner's mind. I'm going to learn clients' perspectives on things. And if you've never done that before, you're a beginner at it. So get into a small cuddle group, a small peer supervision group. Let's try something new. Let's get permission from our clients to talk about these things. I'm not being supervised. I'm simply wanting to become more effective in what I do. And from the research that I've read, and also from the testimonies from people who do this, you do learn and you do have greater effectiveness. And wouldn't that be the goal of everyone, to honor the expertise of clients and become more effective so that people leave more satisfied of reaching the goals and experiencing their preferred futures?
So you don't need to do that in a very structural way. You can just ask your clients and then learn from that.
Yes, I do think that there are some John Norcross's 3 questions, as I said, how are you? How are we? How is this? Is a good beginning point. But one of the better ones, I think, in the long run is to formalize it. And that is using PCOMS or FIT, because it's so simple to do. And clients will learn after that first time they're in there, this is important for me to give an honest response to this. It also gives you feedback on your therapeutic alliance, which I know there are people in solution focus that don't believe that's an important thing. We don't have relationships. We just do therapy. Well, then we are unique among all the 400 or 500 approaches that are out there. That we do know that the ruptures that we have in relationships is why people leave. Not because they're not making progress or don't like the therapy. There's something, the client is annoyed with you and has no way of communicating. We have a rupture in our relationship. I would say generally that applies to solution focus just as much as any other approach that I've seen.
And it's an interesting aspect, especially because from the beginning on of solution-focused brief therapy, the number of sessions and making it briefer and shorter was very much in a focus. And I always thought, well, it can be very short and people leave and they never come back because they had a bad experience. So I can say very brief, but it's not really that what we're looking for. So briefness is not the goal. It's really about effectiveness and about the changes in the lives of the clients that they want to see.
And that comes from research back in the 90s by Moshe Tallman on single session therapy. That's what drove his research question. We have all these people who have come once and disappear. Why did they not come back? We didn't know because we weren't asking. He found out a large percentage of them got what they needed in one session. They weren't treatment failures or failure to engage. It was successful therapy. Well, why didn't we know that until Moshe Tallman got involved with his research? Because we weren't asking clients. Well, now we can ask them from the very beginning, how was this for you? Did it fit your expectations? Would you like to come back for another session? Rather than, would you like to come back for another session, as the only thing that we say at the close of that time.
So Frank, how are we doing?
I think my experience of this has been, I want to do more podcasts. Because it gives you an expressive form that's different from writing. I could write this, but it would have a very different feel for me to talk about the stories and to emphasize what I think is important. So far, so good.
So everyone out there who runs a podcast, please, here's Frank Thomas, and we love to make the contact. And you also will, of course, find the contact details to Frank and our podcast.
And we'll also show you the fit results that Frank will probably let us fill out for this podcast once it's done. You'll find all the resources in the resource section of this podcast on www.sfontour.com/simplyfocuspodcast, and then go to episode number 55. Frank, you are founding Archivist of the SFBTA, and you did such a wonderful job, not only in archiving, but also making sure that all these materials are in a safe place. So what is the SFBTA archive all about, and why is it so important to have this?
When Steve and Insu died, all of the materials that they owned were gifted to SFBTA. And with permission of Sarah Berg and with a lot of collaboration with Peter DeYoung, we gathered boxes and boxes and boxes of materials. Printed materials, electronic versions of materials, unpublished manuscripts, videotapes, audio tapes, even some items that they'd left behind. And it was important for us to preserve it because once you preserve something, if you can digitize it, to make sure it's stored in a place that's safe, making multiple copies, then 100 years from now, 50 years from now, people will be able to revisit it. Right now, it's being stored because most of the material has confidentiality restrictions on it, but it is archived and it's protected, and we have a couple of different locations where we keep it. And I've written some things and presented some things on Insu's supervision, for instance, that came directly from the archives that have been very useful in the book I wrote on supervision and other people learning about supervision from her. So I think there'll be other uses in the future for research, for teaching teaching. Right now, it's going to be stored until a policy can be created for research and training.
And you're one of the very few people who have seen it all.
Yeah, it's remarkable what I'll take to the grave. And many of my students who had to sign confidentiality waivers so they would not talk about any of the materials also see how fortunate they were, how blessed they were to have the opportunity to see Insoo, Peter, Steve, other people from BFTC doing therapy with families from 20 and more than 30 years ago.
And if we saw that, what could we learn from that other than what we already know and is published out there?
I think what happens mostly when I watch these videos where you've got foreshadowing of future discoveries or inventions. I like them as inventions. Where I was watching a videotape from 1984 that had Eve Lipchick, John Walter, Marilyn LaCourte, Insoo, Steve, talking about a case behind the mirror, going in and doing therapy, talking about the case. And in the middle of that, Steve starts talking about this miracle idea. Well, we know the fiction is that Insoo had a client who talked about, well, that would be a miracle, and it started there. But I saw foreshadowing in Steve's ideas of sitting on the floor away from everyone else and listening, and then coming up with this, well, but what if that was all gone? What if the problems we're talking about were just gone? I wonder where that conversation would go. And it was a really remarkable time of saying, there's a foreshadowing of the miracle question. And so there's value in that, as saying that these ideas didn't come dropped from the heavens. They were parts of team conversations, and that kind of collaboration in teams can be encouraged if we see these are brilliant ideas that don't come up in your head, they come up in conversations with teams.
So please videotape your team conversations you have, and not only your work with clients. We'll be curious to see what we can learn from that.
So Frank, from your solution-focused journey, from your solution-focused experience in so many different fields, and I guess we only touched the tip of the iceberg today in our conversation. If there is one thing you would really, really, really love to share with other people, as this was a very important thing for you to learn and might make a difference for them as well, what is that?
Solution focused is not fixed. It's not true. It's a rumor. And we've known that for over 20 years, since Gail and Steve wrote the article about it being a rumor. You have to own your version of that and always be open to people criticizing it. It's not building an empire. It's spreading the good news. And so I just hate to see it restricted to 2.0, no criticism of Mark or anyone else, but that is not solution focused. That's another evolution of solution focused. And there are people I work with here that use textbooks that are from the 1980s, and some of us who are sharing the newest books possible, like Tharana's book, and we learn the history together. And many people are practicing all along that chronology. They're practicing solution focused like they did in 1992 or like they did in 2005. And that also is solution focused. And we need to value that people find these things important in their practices and useful, and that clients get better, whether we're doing the most cutting edge solution focused or some of the earlier work where it's based on a miracle question and scaling and exceptions. They're all valuable, and that's really what I want to leave with everyone. Value what you do. Don't eliminate other ways of doing solution focused. It's another expression of solution focused.
Join in the team solution focus.
Thank you very much for this message and really putting differences to work and get into conversations and use those differences to become even better therapists, coaches, leaders, or whatever, wherever you use solution focus. And also ask your conversation partners and create the journey with them. So thank you very much for this very inspiring conversation, for the time we had with you and the team at TCU. And we're so much looking forward to everything that emerges out of that.
Well, this would not have happened without your questions and your hosting. It's conversational and it comes forth in the conversation. So thank you for setting this up for us. It was absolutely wonderful to walk down memory lane and to look into a future with you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Before we finish off, let's come to the challenge of the week.
The challenge of the week. Between now and next week, choose one or two clients or conversational partners, people who are safe, people that you trust, and simply have a conversation about your conversation. And see what similarities and differences come out of your understanding of what took place. That's a way of trying on practice-based evidence. It's a simple way of doing it with a spouse or a child or a colleague, to see that there are differences in people's experiences of conversations, that it doesn't take place in your head, it takes place between us. Pick one or two people. Have that conversation about the conversation.
Thank you very much.
and let us know what you discovered. Share with us what inspired you, and let us know how we are doing, how you are doing, how this podcast is doing, and share your experiences on www.sfontour.com/simplyfocuspodcast, and then go to this or any other episode and write in the comment field. Thank you very much for being part of our journey, of letting us be part of your journey, and we're looking forward to seeing you next week again.
Have a wonderful week, everyone.
Wow, what a great episode again! Do you also like the Simply Focus podcast? Then help Elfie and Dominic spread the word. Give the Simply Focus podcast a 5-star rating on iTunes, Google Play, and other platforms. Plus, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And share your thoughts and inspirations with others. Comment at www.sfontour.com/simplyfocuspodcast. And then go to this episode. This was Simply Focus Podcast with Elfie Cherney and Dominic Godat. Your podcast for a life in joy and ease.